There is a single thing in chess that's more important for your progress than anything else. That's the main reason for people to lose games on the level below 1600, and that is blunders. So today I'll give you some simple practical tips to reduce the level of blunders in your games and to take advantage of your opponent's blunders. For example, in this position white played pawn e6, and what would you play if you were black? By the way, just to show you some real stuff, I'm a grandmaster. I've been coaching for the last 15 years, and through the Remote Chess Academy, we now have coached thousands of students. So I'll tell you some practical observations, and many of them lie into rather psychology, not even chess, that actually help you to stop blundering. So I'm pretty sure that if you get just one of these ideas and implement it, that's going to immediately raise your rating for a few hundred rating points in no time. Anyway, so the first rule is instant moves leads to instant losses. Such as in this case. When black sees that move happening, attacking different things, it's natural to wish to just grab this move because that's the first move that comes to mind. But after that, white goes queen h5, and all of a sudden, it turns out that black is losing the game. They can temporarily cover that, but after that, white can sack the queen or the bishop and finish the game in style with this checkmate. Now, let's return back to the position before the blunder. So what I might suggest you to do is to calculate things one move ahead, just one. There is this fallacy that in order to be a strong chess player, you need to calculate and visualize for 20 moves ahead, and you need to lock yourself into a cage and train that for the next 50 years of your life. It's not like that. It's a lot easier. Just being aware of your next move, the next move of your opponent, is enough. And how do you do that? You ask yourself this question: can my opponent move forward to my half of the board, to my territory, and attack me somehow? Because here's the deal. Your territory, the last 4 ranks, is what you care about. This is where your pieces are, this is where your king is, and that is when you want to make sure that your opponent cannot barge into that territory and cause some damage. Therefore, any moves of your opponent that cannot possibly attack something on your half of the board, we just don't care about that. And the beauty of that thinking is that many of your opponent's pieces, in fact most of them, cannot even get to this territory at all. For instance, the white king cannot move to the black territory, you don't care about it. So is the knight, so are the rooks, so are all these pawns, in fact all the pawns of white. You see that the vast majority of the white pieces, even theoretically, cannot get to your half of the board, and that's why we don't think about them at all. We only care about pieces that can possibly move to your territory and cause some damage. For instance, this bishop, it can move forward, but there is nothing along this diagonal, and therefore it cannot cause any damage, so we also don't have to worry about this. And the only 2 pieces which we need to think about quickly are this bishop, which could go forward, and the queen. Therefore, you quickly check, can this bishop go somewhere here and attack me? And you realize that no, not your pawn on h7 is already guarded, so bishop takes h7 is not possible, things are okay. Can this queen go forward and attack you? Yes, it can. It's queen h5. So that is the one move check that I'm talking about. You don't have to think about all the moves of your opponent, only those which bring their piece into your half of the board and attack or capture something. Usually there's just 1 or 2 such moves, and you can notice them relatively easily after you train this right way of thinking. But I also want to give you a couple extra advice, also just more practical stuff. One of them, if we take it one move back, there is a more practical thing. It's not even about specifically chess, but just more of a practical advice. Do not accept gambit pawns if you're not familiar with the opening theory. I learned this rule from Karpov, who was the world champ, and he followed this rule brilliantly, and he was one of the very consistent players who lost very few games during his prime. So if you're not familiar with the opening theory, just deny gambit pawns. Simply continue your development, prioritize development, and you'll be good to go. Therefore, I'd say do not even take this pawn. Even if you're not sure what's going to happen after that, or if you made that thing, you can just return the knight back to good squares, and as long as you keep your pieces to good squares, your position will be fine. With that being said, there is also one more general tip, which is quite a prudent thing. If we take things back a couple moves before this whole thing, we'll realize that at this point, black played knight f6, letting the white pawn to move forward, and later this pawn became in trouble that black had to deal with. And it makes sense, because as we already know, whenever there is opponent's piece or pawn on your half of the board, this one starts causing troubles. And therefore it's not a coincidence that this pawn on e5 exactly the one causing issues. So the rule says, I call it a zero tolerance policy. try to avoid any opponent's piece or pawn on your territory. And as long as you do that, usually you just prevent any possible dangers prior to the point where they could even become a real danger. So taking this back, I'd say just not let them push this pawn forward. You can just take it. And after you do this, and let's say you now play knight f6, there are no pieces of white on your territory, and it is much harder for white to come up with any attacking ideas, and that is a really great rule to follow. Here's the next example. It was black to play, and black played rook e8. What would you play here if you were white? You may think about this for a couple seconds, and then we'll talk about this together. By the way, for those who are following the channel, you may notice that the position arises from the Dutch defense, one of the nice openings for black to play. Anyway, back to this example. You may ask yourself this question, which is really helpful. What is the idea of my opponent? So why did he play the move rook to e8? Probably the only reason to justify this move would be trying to push this pawn forward so that the rook supports that advancement. That's probably the only reason why black could have played the move there. And as soon as you notice that he can go forward and expand there and start attacking different things, maybe going forward, that feels unpleasant, and that gives you an idea about what your opponent is going to do. Therefore, you can do something against it. In the game, however, white missed this, and he just played h3, allowing black to play e5. Now after the trade, the bishop has to move, white retreated to h2, and after e4, that was a double attack, black wins a piece and gets a winning position. Now, I also want to stop here and bring up another thing, which I think is probably even more important than anything else that I would say today, because I'm giving you a couple of tips, and I certainly do not expect you to remember and to follow them all. That would be ridiculous. Like, you don't need a long list, like long checklist, and try to follow that. Like, this not practically can't do that. But even if you just take away one idea from this whole video and actually start implementing it, the one that resonates with you, is going to make a big difference. And here's what I've noticed about these positions. Quite often people got upset psychologically about their blunders. And as soon as they realize that they blunder, they just kind of mentally resign. They lose interest to this game. They start playing next moves like carelessly, already expecting to lose it. And that is a totally wrong approach. Because think about this. On the level below 1600, there are blunders in every game. Like, with rare exceptions, but in pretty much every game that is played, there are blunders, usually multiple blunders from both sides. Therefore, it is totally normal and only expected that blunders will occur in your games. I'd be very surprised if there are no blunders. Now, below 1600, blunders in every game. Below 2000, people do blunder, but more occasionally. And even, beyond that point, people still blunder. Even grandmasters and the world champs, they also blunder. They just do it infrequently, right? So there's nothing really special about that. And you certainly need to keep fighting. Moreover, let's not forget that your opponent is going to blunder just as well. And within the same game, he or she may as well make a number of blunders, which could easily turn the situation around. So certainly there is no reason to give up at this point, and you just need to keep fighting. How do you do that more specifically? Well, you've probably heard about the idea that when you're up material, you want to simplify, so that it's easier for you to win without any complications. Therefore, when you're down material, you want to follow the opposite advice. Complicate. Complicate matters. Attack. Make it harder for your opponent to beat you. So let's take it back. Let's say white realized that they blundered this thing. They realize, oh, my bishop is attacked, and after he goes, they go e4 with this double attack and they win. So what do you want to do at this point? You want to go forward. You want to counterattack. You want to complicate matters. So instead of retreating back to h2 kind of defensively, you want to attack. You want to bring the bishop forward. Let's at least pin this knight. After he goes e4, you ask yourself the same question. Okay, I'm going to lose something, but can I move forward? Can I counterattack? Can I get something? And you start thinking, maybe I can go knight d4 and at least grab this pawn on f5. What about that? Is there anything else? Can I somehow move forward? Maybe I can take here, at least get a pawn for my bishop. Is there any other idea? Can I go forward, complicate matters, attack? So there is also a move c5. We know that if we want to attack, we want to move to our opponent's half of the board. And now we see, okay, if he takes one of my pieces, I'm going to play c6 and do the same thing to him and double attack his minor pieces. Pretty interesting. And if he captures right here on c5, then I've got this new move, bishop c4, because this square is now vacant. The king will have to move, and now I have time to move my knight away. Knight d4, counter this pawn. Our bishop is active, this bishop is also active, and we're only down a pawn, and we have some compensation. So all of a sudden you could turn the situation around. And whether your opponent will be able to calculate all these variations and to find the right move or not, that's a big question. In most cases they won't. Therefore, this idea of not resigning mentally, but keep looking for ways to complicate, to attack, and to not give up can be really a big change in your game. This is the other example. It is black to play. Once again, you may think about this for a couple of seconds. How would you play here if you were black? And I'd like to mention a few other really practical things which people usually do not address while talking about blunders, but I think, again, they're more important probably than any standard tips. Now, in this position, the most played move by black is knight to e7, which actually is a big blunder. After that, black failed to do that one move check, asking themselves, can my opponent move forward and attack something in my position? Move forward to your half of the board. If black were to ask themselves that question, they'll realize that potentially there are only these two moves, white can jump forward and attack something, that I would say black needs to consider, because they would attack something. And one of them, knight g5, indeed makes it very unpleasant because it opens up for quite a lot of threats here. The knight is going to come here with other double attacks, and black is indeed going down straight away. They can move the pawn, but after knight f7, anyway, they'd be losing some material. So that is a blunder. However, I would actually argue that, if black were to do that one move check, that would secure them from this blunder. However, black could secure themselves from this blunder just by raising their positional understanding. Because in this position, black should have played knight f6 regardless of whether knight e7 is a blunder or not, just because positional chess teaches us the principle of maximum activity, that you need to put your pieces to most forward available squares. They're most active there, and therefore you should develop your knight to f6. Think about this interesting thing. Magnus Carlsen is not the greatest tactical player out there. Now, I'm saying this, of course, with due respect to him, but if his positional chess is 10 out of 10, his endgame skills are 11 out of 10, so his tactics might be 8 out of 10, which is still good, but it's actually inferior to many top GMs. So think about this. In that component, Carlsen could be inferior. If you looked at different situations where Carlsen was offered to solve a tactical puzzle and the same puzzle was offered to other GMs, quite often other GMs are actually doing better. But when it comes to actual chess, guess what? Carlsen very rarely blunders, and he beats them. How come? Because his positional understanding tells him in such positions that the knight should go to f6, not to e7. And therefore, even if he does not calculate all these variations as well as his opponents, he would still play the right move because his positional understanding is superior, and that automatically secures you from blunders. Because if you move the knight right here, guess what? A knight is more active, it controls more squares. Therefore, automatically, we take away the opportunity from white to jump forward with their knight to h5 and attack black that way. Also, if white goes knight g5, then you can castle, but unlike having the knight on e7, the knight controls these two squares, making it impossible for white to follow up and to play something like queen h5, and to keep attacking. With this knight on f6, black secured themselves. Again, even if they missed this knight g5 move initially, their position would still be good. So I'd say that the more you increase your positional understanding, the fewer blunders you will make, regardless of the fact of whether you notice those strong moves or not. And if you want to increase your positional understanding, I'd recommend that you check out my free masterclass. I'll drop a link below this video in the description where I teach you all these fundamental principles that you need to know to play positionally well. Alright, now let's have a quick task for you. In this position, it is black to move. How would you play here if you're black? The most played move by black is bishop b4, so please think about this and let me know in comments down below if that's a good move for black or not. And let me also address the other thing, which again is not about chess really, rather about psychology, but again I think it is even more important. I call it the casino effect. Now, when you play a lot of blitz games in a row, you want to end the series on a win. But sometimes you realize that you're on a downward trend. You start blundering pieces more often than usual, you lose on time sometimes, so you somehow forgot about that. And then people often wish to keep playing, just trying to get that revenge, trying to get their rating back, trying to end the series on a win. But that usually leads to a long losing streak, and you just can drop a few hundred rating points in one go. And I call it the casino effect because it kind of reminds me like someone is playing that slot machine in a casino, and he keeps pulling the lever, hoping for a big win next time, sure enough just to lose everything. Therefore, it's more prudent to cool down and just to put chess down for a second and then come back tomorrow when you're refreshed, you're not tired, or you can even reflect of why things went not your way yesterday. Maybe you blundered too much. Maybe you just need to implement one of the ideas from this video. And you tell to yourself, okay, today when I play games, after my opponent plays his moves, I'm going to remind myself that I need to ask what's his idea. And that will allow me to, make fewer blunders. And tomorrow your results can be just much better and you avoid that downward trend which you had yesterday. Alrighty, we've already covered a lot of interesting tips. I don't want to overload you, but still I'll give you a few other frames of thinking to reduce blunders. And once again, I don't mean to say that you need to think about all of them. Just pick the one that resonates with you the most, alright? Now, in this position, over 1 million players played here knight to g5. Just missing up the fact that this is not the two knights game, and in this case this sort of right liver attack does not work just because black can play queen takes g5 and they're just winning a knight and getting a winning position. So how do you secure yourself from those kind of things? One of the questions to ask yourself is, am I moving a piece to a safe square? Very straightforward. So if you're going to play knight to g5, ask yourself that question, am I moving a piece to a safe square? Fundamentally, it's actually the same one move check which we talked about previously. You ask yourself, after I play my move, can my opponent go forward and take or attack something? But anyway, we're just getting even more tactical, because if you do that one move check, you will still realize that not many of your opponent's players can move forward and cause damage. Maybe this bishop takes f2 or queen takes g5. And you can quickly notice that bishop takes f2 doesn't do that much, you just recapture with your king, but queen takes g5 wins the knight. So that's one thing which is simple, but anyway, being even more specific, you can ask yourself, am I moving a piece to a safe square? Can it be captured? And here is a more advanced version of the same thing. It is black to move, and in such positions, many players are going to play pawn e4, just because they notice that this is a double attack to the bishop and the knight. They got excited, and that is a very dangerous moment. Very often I've noticed that when people get excited about delivering a fork to opponent's king and queen, they just play this move out only to realize that it was a fork, but that square was defended, so it was actually your blunder. And in this position, after you play e4, that's another idea about counting attackers versus defenders. You've probably heard about this idea before, but just in case, I'll mention this. So if there are several pieces controlling the same square, then we need to compare the quantity of attackers and defenders. In this case, white has two pieces, bishop and a knight, which attacks the e4 square, 2, and black has only one defender. Therefore, 2 is greater than 1, which means that white is going to win as a result of this exchange. And e4 is not going to win anything, it's going to be a blunder. White's got 2 attackers versus 1 defenders, and white will end up winning material. And here is the final question that you may ask yourself. Here black went for this O-wins defense. Pretty good opening, by the way. Bishop b4 pins the knight and therefore attacks this pawn on e4. White guards it. Knight f6 attacks this pawn once again. And white goes e5. Now, a lot of players in such positions would follow the first mistake we've been talking about in this video. Instant moves. They'll notice that the knight is attacked and they would move it to d5. Now, we know that we should avoid instant moves. And another question which I love asking myself after my opponent has played a move is what has changed? Just to comprehend what's going on with the game overall. So when your opponent has just played a move pawn e5, even if you think you're going to play knight d5, you can pause for a second and ask yourself what has changed. Now, obviously, this pawn is now more advanced and it is attacking your knight. You're going to need to do something about that. Okay, is there anything else? Well, we noticed that by moving the pawn forward, that actually opened up this diagonal, making it possible for you to grab the pawn as well as the rook, and that would just win material, and that's the best thing for black to play. So e5 turns out to be a blunder, and black can play bishop g2, grabbing the rook on the next move, and yes, you're going to lose the knight right here, but you are going to win a couple of pawns and the rook, therefore you'll be up material and you'll win. However, I would say that even if, let's say, that blunder was not in place, if, let's say, bishop takes g2 was not possible for whatever reason, still noticing that this diagonal is now open and you can capitalize on it is also an interesting fact just to be aware of. For example, you may realize that besides this move knight to d5, you can actually go forward with knight e4, and that is also a move worth considering. It's even a more advanced move which controls greater quantity of squares into your opponent's position, and this knight is actually pinned, so it can't capture a knight. It is rather the opposite, you're attacking the knight. But from here, you're also controlling all these squares, so knight e4 could be even stronger. So therefore, asking yourself this question, what has changed, can help you to understand positions better and to find better moves and some new opportunities that you would have missed otherwise. Please let me know in comments below which advice resonated with you the most and which one you're going to incorporate in your games, and I'll be curious to follow up. Also, if you want to improve your positional understanding overall, head to my free masterclass by clicking the link below in the description or up there, and there you'll find those few little ideas that are going to be making a big difference. Finally, if you missed out on my video about the single Fisher's rule that can double your chess results, check out the video right here.